Hello, everyone. All right, so let's talk about agentic commerce when agents move from intranet to the internet. Of course, right now there's an agent chaos. If you're thinking about building agents, doing ventures in a startup or a company, how do they make money? How do they get users? Why should anybody trust your agent? What breaks when agents are delegated and are trying to work together? And probably the most important is, yes, you're hearing about all the noise, all the excitement, but it's too late if you start working on exactly what you're hearing. So if you have to start today, what's the roadmap for the next 2 to 3 years so it makes sense to start working on it today? So I want you to kind of zoom out and think about a scenario where Dr. John in rural Texas is helping his patient, Sarah, and she has comorbidities and a lot of disease complexities. Can John go online and go on the global hive and for $100 from a future AI systems, create the best treatment plan for Sarah? And what should happen is when John prompts this to the global AI, all the agents in different hospitals and clinics and insurance companies and pharma companies wake up. All these millions of agents wake up. They start collaborating. They say, hey, there's $100. Let's bid for it. They collaborate. And then there's another system that figures out how do you price intelligence and how do you pay the agents whose insights were used. And finally, another player comes in and says, I'm going to collect all the intelligence from these millions of agents and create a very explainable treatment plan for John. And by the way, all of this happens in a matter of minutes. So as you can see, the agentic web is not about some kind of a query from a model, but it's an interaction with a network of intelligence with millions, maybe billions of agents. And that network is available as a marketplace of intelligence. OK, let's take another scenario. My daughter's birthday is coming up. Who here gets excited about designing a themed birthday party for a loved one? OK, I get completely stressed out, right? So imagine if I can just say, hey, Party City agent, my daughter's birthday is coming up. What should I do? And what happens with Party City agent is it sucks up all the photos on my phone, looks at whether my daughter likes Taylor Swift or Star Wars, negotiates with all the vendors out there for supplies, and then takes a 3D model of my backyard, and I can just lift my phone, and I see my daughter smiling and playing with her friends with the right theme party, and I have 3 options, $200, $500, $1,000. This all happens in a couple of minutes, and I click one of them, all the supplies get delivered the next day, right? So, for folks like me, don't sell me a product, just buy my need, understand my intent. The challenge, of course, is who's going to allow a third party to suck up photos and look at my daughter's pictures? Which vendor is going to allow complete access to their inventory and pricing strategy, right? Who's going to maintain the 3D model of my house, and which Gen AI company is going to piece all those 3 pieces together, which is 3D model of my backyard, the pictures of my daughter and her friends, and the party supplies, all kind of pieced together in this amazing video. So this is the decentralized agentic web for shopping, as opposed to agents that are just doing better shopping on existing e-commerce sites. So we think agentic web is going to go through these 3 phases. The first phase, the first column, is the foundations. Second column is agentic commerce. And the third phase is agentic society. And if you look at the horizontal rows, this is where the action is. There's a lot of syntax. There's a lot of chaos in the ecosystem right now, different protocols and so on. My request to you is just ignore that. Because the layer above that is more interesting, which is the system plane and the control plane. But most of the value will actually accrue in the collective and the global plane. So let's talk about a little bit more what's happening in these layers. So this is a quick summary. We're going to talk about agents to agentic web. We're going to talk from agent X to X for agents. We're going to talk about agentic commerce. That's different than how we work today. We're going to talk about open web versus closed web. What are some innovation unlocks? And despite that, what are challenges ahead of us? So right now, we are in the mainframe era of AI, slowly moving to the intranet, where agents are being deployed within corporate ecosystems. From there, we need to move to the internet, and this is a massive shift that we're going to see. And internet was about connecting machines. The World Wide Web was about connecting people, and NANDA is about connecting agents. And NANDA stands for Network AI Agents in Decentralized Architecture, also the name of my sister. And the reason why we will see this decentralized web is we'll see billions, maybe trillions of AI agents. Anybody here keeping track of OpenClaw and so on? Okay, excellent. So, the personalized agents are coming. They'll run on the edge. We're seeing new chips, new models, that have lossless compression of them. And then privacy, latency, cost, and sovereign agents are the trend. So all of these things are pushing us towards decentralization, and it's debatable whether we need all that infra AI buildup that's going on, trillions of dollars of investments that are going on in highly centralized systems. The other shift that we're seeing is that the last 14 years since the AlexNet were about machine learning, but going forward, it's about machine co-learning. And we think machine co-learning is a very important element to enable agentic commerce, because agentic commerce is going to be more like the Game of Thrones. The agents are not just buying and selling services, but they're negotiating, they're forming coalitions, and they're competing for data and other resources to achieve the best digital outcome. But for that, they're going to form alliances. There's going to be betrayal. There's going to be a lot that's going to happen in agentic commerce. Most of the time, it's betrayal. And another challenge right now when you think about agents is that we are kind of in the productivity phase, right? It's all about efficiencies, like, agents for law, and agents for health, and agents for coding, and agents for browsing, and so on. Again, this is just tip of the iceberg. When the conversation shifts to X for agents, it's not agents for finance, but finance for agents. It's not agents for insurance, but insurance for agents. So this services for agents is going to be a much bigger opportunity. If you're keeping track of what Jensen Huang said at his keynote at NVIDIA, he basically said so far the customer base was, let's say, 8 billion people. So the cap to how much people use NVIDIA chips. But in the future, the real customers are agents. And there'll be unlimited number of agents, and there'll be unlimited need for compute. And that's the same situation here. The X for agents, we have to just accept that we are not the most important market anymore. The new market is agents. And then in terms of sovereign AI, I just came back from India at the Global AI Summit, and we're launching with the Indian government an AI agent for every Indian citizen. So 1.5 billion agents out there. So, and many countries are thinking along the same lines as well. So what we need is a marketplace of specialized agents. And the best analogy for that is high-frequency trading. Because in high-frequency trading, we already see these bots where humans have very little input, and they're making decisions worth billions of dollars on a daily basis, on a minute-to-minute basis. So, but what do we need? For high-frequency trading, we need a registry of validated stocks. We need a KYC for your customers and brokers. There is a sufficiently transparent price discovery. Brokers get a cut. And of course, we need to deal with fraud, insider trading, and all the good stuff. And agentic commerce is similar in analogy. So, to allow John to interact with all these agents out there, we need some kind of a authenticated registry of all the hospitals and clinics and insurance companies and so on. But they also have to be validated. They also have to be trusted. So we need a KYA, a know your agent. The pricing has to be computed on the fly. And then, of course, there has to be some gas money for the infra agents. And of course, most of the agents actually will be scammy out there. So we need a mechanism to deal with them. And the question is, who's going to build this agentic web infrastructure? Because whoever builds it is going to own it and try to create a closed ecosystem of walled gardens. This is what we received for iPhone and Android, iOS and Android. This is what we got with Facebook and Twitter. So hopefully, the agentic web will look more like the World Wide Web, open, neutral, and vibrant, as opposed to what we have in most of the current ecosystems. And if once it's open, there'll be innovation unlock, interoperability, composability, and there'll be a lot of innovation at the edge. So that's what NANDA is doing. We are trying to see how we can keep the agentic web open while keeping my marker with me. And we think there are 4 choke points. And if we can solve those 4 choke points, we have a chance, a very small chance, of making sure we'll get a very open web. And the 4 choke points are the registry, something that looks like a DNS and ICANN. Second is equivalent of certifying authorities, so agent passports and certification. Third one is obvious, interoperability. And the fourth is attestation, because the quality of the agents, the reputation, and are they really solving the problem that's given to them has to be attested by a third party from a minute-to-minute basis. So you need kind of attester as well. And this is what we've been working on for the last 12 years at MIT, just down the street. And we have pioneered many aspects of how this decentralized and open web of AI and AI agents will look like. And we welcome you to participate in how this agentic web is being developed. So we have something called Nest, which is a NANDA sandbox. And then you can bring in your agents, you can put them on the web. Even today, by the way, no agent is available with an open endpoint. It's like everybody has a telephone, but there's no telephone exchange. And what you're building is the telephone exchange. So this is a sandbox of a telephone exchange where you can bring your agents and try that out. And so the research that's going on at MIT, the research roadmap, is really focusing on these 3 main problems. How do you create the foundations? How do you do intelligence pricing? Because the agentic commerce is going to be an intelligence commerce. So intelligence is priced for their models, for their inference, for their context, what tools they have available, and of course, what Rolodex, what network these agents have. And then, as I said, co-learning, which is how do 2 agents learn from each other, not from just data and experiences. So in terms of this research roadmap, we'll make these slides available to you, but there are many subtle issues, and we think each of these bullets is probably worth a corporate venture or a startup venture. So go to our website, nanda.mit.edu, to look at how we're thinking about this. And of course, this is a big tent. We're working with many organizations. It's like a W3C for AI agents. Big tech companies, research organizations, government organizations, you're welcome to participate in this coalition as well. There are a lot of hackathons going on, a lot of fellowships, a lot of internships as part of this program. So go to the website and apply for that. There's one that's about to start on a hackathon, not for AI agents, but for the agentic web, for the internet of AI agents. And as I said, that's about to start. Go to nandahack.media.mit.edu. And again, the goal is to build the infrastructure for the agentic web, not just collection of agents that can do some fun things. It's not agents for X, but X for agents. Now, this can be a little bit intimidating. The fact that there are millions, billions, trillions of agents. Maybe in the beginning, like the effort in India, maybe it's 1:1. Every agent is anchored to one identity. But very soon, the ratio will change. It will be maybe 1,000 agents to an individual, or maybe 1,000,000 agents to an individual. So the question is, in this world of trillions of autonomous agents, how do we make sure that we, as humans, are still in control? So instead of thinking about AI safety, now we need to start thinking about the AI agent safety that's going on. And what can we build, what can we bake in as part of the infrastructure so we really understand what a delegation and oversight and audit of these agents look like, not just on the intranet, but also on the internet. So, the open agentic commerce, again, agents are not just trading in data and services. We need intelligence to be created, intelligence to be discovered on the fly, intelligence to be priced, and intelligence has to be coordinated. But if we do not build an open web, we're going to get this closed ecosystem where all the intelligence, all the services, all the transactions will be locked away in, say, like 5 big tech companies, like we have today in closed ecosystems. It's a difficult few months coming up because we think in the next 6 months we will get intense protocol wars and partnerships war. All these 5 players are going to carve out the market for themselves. 6 months after that, if they have 100, 200 billion users, they will use those distribution channels to create extremely closed ecosystems and lock innovation. And 6 months after that, there'll be extreme dependencies on tooling, on clouds, on models. New agent stores will appear just like app stores, and you'll have to give away 30% of the revenues you're making. And if your app starts becoming more and more popular, it will just get embedded, as part of the, the big tech player, like what's happening with coding right now. And we could get a completely closed web, and it could be game over in about 18 months. Or we can all work together to make sure we're using open protocols. We're contributing to solve these 4 choke points and create an open web where problems like health or energy or transportation or even democracy, any multi-sided problems that requires extreme coordination and has significant commercial value will actually be deployed on this open agentic web. So to summarize, don't think about AI agents. It's the internet of AI agents as we move from mainframe era to the PC era to the internet era. Instead of focusing on bringing efficiency by deploying agents, we'll start thinking what new markets are going to emerge when we think about services for agents. Agentic commerce is really about, agentic commerce is moving away from the factory era of AI. Right now we have, let's say, 5 players that build AI models in a factory, and then we just use them downstream, to the garage era, where every one of us will be able to train and infer models in our own laptops, in our own cars, on our prem, and so on, to the bazaar era, where all of us are participating in the commerce of this, right? And it's also possible that the bazaar era will mature well before the enterprise era, just like it happened with the World Wide Web, the way it's happening with ChatGPT, the way it's happening with OpenClaw. And it's possible that the consumer AI agents will move faster than the enterprise AI agents. Nevertheless, we have a risk that this will become a closed wall gardens. And NANDA and other efforts are trying to solve these 4 choke points. So make sure you're aware of that and not just excited about building agents. But there are certain innovation unlocks that are required, such as co-learning and knowledge and intelligence pricing. Nevertheless, when you have billions and trillions of AI agents, most of them built by folks like us with vibe coding, there's going to be a lot of chaos. The governance that we hear about at the enterprise level is just going to explode. The problems in governance are going to explode as we get a lot of scammy, a lot of adversarial, and very sophisticated agents that are roaming on the open web. I think that's going to create a lot of new jobs for sure. So I think we have an opportunity to think about this amazing agentic commerce that's going to unlock trillions of dollars in value. But I hope the roadmap for the next 2 to 3 years will focus on as opposed to what we are doing today. So please join us at nanda.mit.edu or projectnanda.org for fellowships, for open source projects, for joining research consortiums, and so on. Thank you. I believe we have time for some questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Stand by the mic. Mic is right there. Or shout it out.
Okay. Maybe you mentioned it already, but I mentioned that many agents for the same purpose, just like websites and internet or products. Will there be a mechanism to rate them just the products that cost reviews?
Yeah. So you're asking about, the question was about kind of trust and reputation. Will there be like a Yelp for AI agents? And that's going to be another $1 billion company because there'll be equivalent of a Google search, equivalent of Yelp, equivalent of AOL, AOL from the 90s, for agents. And the challenge with creating a search for agents is that for websites, you can just crawl them. I can just start from like mit.edu, and from there I can crawl the whole web because it's all interconnected. But agents are not going to be interconnected. They're just going to transact among themselves, but they're not send any telemetry or breadcrumbs to some central system. So it's not that easy to understand what all the agents are out there. The registry that would emerge, an ICANN-like registry, might help, but that's not enough. But then the second challenge that you're mentioning is what's the reputation of them? What's the credit score for this equivalent of credit score for these agents? Also a wide open problem. So a lot of research that we are doing at MIT and as part of NANDA are related to that. And it involves really good math, really good incentives, privacy preserving distributed computing mechanisms, and so on. Yeah, go ahead.
Great talk, thanks. I got a lot to think about as I fall asleep with 1,000 agents sort of crawling the web for me. But you kind of presented, as I see, sort of two different futures. One is where there's sort of one agent per person. One is where there's 1,000 agents per person. I kind of see these as almost mutually exclusive, right? Whereas you have one agent that kind of general purpose internet crawling thing for me versus 1,000 bespoke agents. Which sort of path do you sort of see going?
It's kind of a continuum. In the beginning, remember when smartphones came along, it was like one person, one phone, but then the phone now has hundreds of apps. But in a way, those hundreds of apps are under my control. So you could imagine there's the equivalent of an agentic phone, but that agentic phone has thousands of agentic apps on them. So it's kind of a continuum, and of course, difficult to predict how this is going to play out. Right now, our identity and our life is split up. My travel life, my health life, my social life, my financial life is owned by those companies. But maybe in the agentic world, it will flip. And I own everything, and I negotiate with the services. The Ramesh agent is the one that's negotiating with all the services. We don't know if that will emerge. In the open agentic web, I can imagine that. But I think right now, every company is trying to own their own agentic vertical. So the finance company is trying to own, saying, hey, Ramesh, your financial agent is going to sit at JPMC, and the Harvard Hospital is going to say, hey, your health agent is going to sit at Harvard hospitals, and so on. So we're going to fight that battle. I think we have lost that battle as consumers multiple times. But I think for the agentic web, it becomes more critical because currently when I use my websites, what I do on my health website is kind of disconnected from what I do on my financial websites. But in the agentic world, I want my health agent and my financial agent to also talk to each other. So the teaming will force them to create some kind of a nexus between them and more interoperability. That's the hope, but let's see what happens.
Question here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Ramesh. Quick question. So, like you mentioned, in the future, it's most likely that agents are going to be competing for resources amongst each other and attending to different needs. Which agents are going to be highest prioritized? So when you have millions of agents out, which are going to be prioritized? Is it going to be similar to what we have in the world right now, where it's who has the most power, who has the most money, and most resources?
So to me, it's like almost like a spectrum auction in telecom, and the system in India is called Digidut. Dut means messenger. You have 4 levels. At the top level are all the government agents. They're highly regulated. The next level are business agents. And all of them had to go through certification and so on. The third level is consumer agents that are all anchored at what's called Aadhaar, which is like a social security number for everybody, but very good identity and payment rails. And the fourth rail is intentionally unregulated. So if you're a researcher, you want to spin up an agent to look at Boston Red Sox for today's game, and so on. So it's also unregulated. So kind of these 4 layers with corresponding levels of monitoring, auditing, and so on. So that's the system that's being built in India. But I could imagine something similar will happen in the rest of the world as well.
One last question.
I love this design. What happens when governments get involved in terms of regulation, taxation, and surveillance?
Yeah. So I think the KYC, as you know, we have the whole commerce runs on KYC, and the same thing used to happen for KYA. Now the question is, should KYA be run by a government authority, a regulated authority, or should it be some kind of a decentralized set of entities that run the KYA? It's not an easy question to answer. Our goal at NANDA is to make sure that there's at least one reference implementation that's agreed upon as a consensus by many players. But I would imagine that the KYA that you do for your financial life might be different than KYA you do for buying baseball tickets, for example. So there may be different levels of it as well, and there could be like a cottage industry of know your agent. But I think whether it's regulated or not, it will definitely be highly controlled.